our working title for our plant breeding club is called SeedWorks, and includes Annie and Kim and Greta and Frank and our colleague Kathy as well. And there are 6 of us. Some of us have seed companies already and have been doing a lot of work for many years, producing seed. Some came from more farming backgrounds. And there's also links with local and international food and seed security work that is being done as well. So this is sort of where we're spread out. We're about 6 hours away from each other, Southern Ontario. And really, the reason we came together, as I see it, is we started being involved in workshops like we're having today. We went on, many trips that were put on through the Bauta initiative. We've come to past eco-signs. We've started to attend the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario conferences that started about 4 years ago. And we've just spent a lot of time. These pictures don't show this particular part, but we spent a lot of time in cars and vans and giant SUVs traveling around. And in those conversations, we really realized that there's something to be said about doing things collaboratively. And it's really this idea of perhaps holding each other accountable to a project was something that we needed. Like sometimes breeding projects in a seed operation where you're producing a lot of vegetable seed for a company, sometimes the breeding project, even though it's fun and exciting, might get lower down on the list. And so the comments in these conversations were, if we do it in a group, we can, check in with each other, hold each other accountable, but also perhaps for our first project together, if we had someone maybe have a project that they could give us to start off with, and then we are also accountable to that new cross that was made and that person who helped us start that journey. So it was multiple layers of responsibility and accountability. And so at past conferences, we had these conversations. One in particular, when I asked my crew what I should mention, Kathy just wrote to me, mention the stairs. And it took me a while to remember what she was talking about, but really we were sitting on the stairs at an Organic Seed Alliance conference and had these great conversations with Dr. Michael Mazurek at Cornell and Rachel Haldegren, who was a graduate student of his at the time, and talking about these desires that we had for doing something together, for maybe getting something that they could, hand us as an initial project. And so we started out with embarking on a pepper project. And why peppers? From Annie working with farmers around the Kingston area, speaking with farmers, saying, this sort of observation that I had also been seeing as I was at the market table at the CSA pickup, that customers were reaching for the blocky green peppers and not going for the red, more long peppers. And that was an observation that multiple of us had made. And turned out that this was also something that had been talked about by many farmers across the north of the United States as well in this project called the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative. And Rachel Haldegren had done these farmer surveys and discussions, and blocky red peppers had come up as well for them. And so she had spoken to farmers about what is their favorite peppers that they like to grow, and then did a trial, as all breeding projects are. It's a good place to start for breeding projects, is doing trials. And so they looked at what was the earliest and what was, the blockiest pepper. And as you can see from this data, the Ace F1, which is something we grew all the time, very early ripening red pepper for us in southern Ontario. It's a hybrid. And the blockiest one that they found in these trials was one called Aristotle, also a hybrid. And so Rachel, we're having this conversation on the stairs in February, and Rachel did a cross between plants that were in the greenhouse, managed to get them to ripen and send us a very small quantity of seed to be able to plant that same year. And so we have to set ourselves a goal because we're doing it collaboratively, and we wanted to make sure that we're using our eyes to sort of pull out the best of a particular goal. So we were going for early blocky red peppers for organic systems that also taste good. And we always, when we planted the seeds, we always wanted to also plant the 2 parent lines so that we could see were we improving, was there success in what we were achieving. So we went through this method of mass selection. So on 4 farms that initial year, we grew as many of the seeds as we could. So up to 140 seeds each. Out of those, we planted as many as we could out into the field, and we were going to then select the best out of that huge population. It was great that at the time, Annie was growing at a CSA farm, and I was as well, so we had a place to sell the excess of these peppers. So here we are growing them out, and we also had this, because of this relationships that we had built, Michael and Rachel were actually able to come up and walk the fields with us that season, which also, of course, helps. But let me tell you, behind these 2 hybrid peppers, you get this amazing mix of genes that show themselves. So you get yellow leaves and dark leaves and thick leaves and narrow leaves and tall plants and short plants and yellow peppers and long peppers and fluted peppers and everything. There was so much diversity in here, which was really amazing for me to see. But, we were always selecting for our goal. So we were selecting things that ripened before the Aristotle and were more blocky than the Ace. And because we're doing it in a collaborative, we would then select those best in our individual plots, send them to Annie. Annie shook them up in a bag and then sent them out in the next year so that we would continue getting broad adoption across southern Ontario. In Ontario, we have there was a program called the Vegetable Seed Producers Network that was run through the Bauta Initiative and Seeds of Diversity Canada. They already had descriptor forms of what one might look for in a pepper population. So we started with these forms as something where we were gathering data. We've since decided there's some of this that wasn't as helpful for us, and we've created our own forms, but it's nice to agree to what data you should gather. And that taste great thing that I thought was also really important. This is Annie last year doing a blind trial of ripe, delicious red peppers at market in Kingston, and people would vote on which ones were best. And you can talk to her more, but our peppers came out many beans ahead of any others. So as we go along and we're seeing all of this diversity, of course, some of us get really excited about other things as well. So we've started to pull out some of the yellow peppers as well. So not only do we have the red sort of wide genetic diversity population, but we also have 2 other projects going on where we've taken our favorite yellow pepper plants and are growing progeny lines of those. So we have 12 plants that we keep separate from each other, and we see if how how much diversity is in that one plant, and is there something that's stable and looks good and tastes good that maybe we can release for folks that want more stability. And we're also doing that with some of our best red peppers as well. So there's two thoughts here where we really love the wide, broadly adapted, mass-selected pepper. And maybe there's also a need for uniformity for some farmers and the way that they would like to grow peppers in the fields. So that's just speaking to that about the progeny lines. So that was the catalyst to getting us to sit down in the winter and talk about, doing work together. And so we're in our 4th season of growing peppers, but only last October did we sort of decide to more formally talk about ourselves as a plant breeding club. And this came from a number of different sources. From my perspective, I had worked in Honduras with local agricultural research committees who had formed together to improve agriculture within their community, and a lot of them were working on creating better varieties within their community, doing that through real scientific replication and randomization trials, and then being able to share that with the community through symposiums and conferences. And another thing that started in 2016 was in Ontario we have the Farmer-Led Research program, which is run through the EFAO, and that's where it's based on a methodology from the Practical Farmers of Iowa, but it's where farmers who are curious about questions on their farm can work together and also have someone who is sort of a staff person at EFAO work with them to create a protocol, an experimental layout to answer that question. And then that person can also work with them throughout the season, remind them of dates that they had agreed to check on things and all of this sorts of things, and then also create in this case, beautiful posters that are then presented at a farmer-led research symposium that happens the first day of our EFAO conference. So there's that ability to disseminate the information that the farmers are gathering. And I'm going to go back for a sec. And we decided to join in this farmer-led research project as a team of pepper growers, and it gave us the ability to get a little bit, we get a little bit of a stipend as researchers. We get a little bit of assistance with some of the, purchasing some of the equipment that we might need. So I was talking about the progeny lines and keeping them separate. We're using ProtectNet to cover them so that they're not crossing right at the beginning of the season. Anyway, so some of that equipment we also got support with purchasing. And another thing, Kathy, who's one of our members who is not here, had started to read this book I had read a while ago called Return to Resistance, which is written by a plant breeder that Greta also knew and went to many seed gatherings with, called Raoul Robinson, speaking about many things, about sort of how to take breeding back away from the hands of chemical companies, and alternatives to that being the only model that he saw at the time as the place that breeding was happening. And kindly in there is information on how to organize plant breeding clubs. Great chapter. So this is a little quote from the book, but just talking about working with crops that are important to your area is how I read that. And so of course we're working on our pepper project, but there are many other projects that members of our plant breeding club are working on, from cabbage to beets to squash. And Heron also mentions the broccoli project. So this is something that we were sitting down in the winter speaking of what are the needs of our fellow farmers, what are we seeing. There was a survey of the breeding priorities for organics that came out, and in there is also a heat-tolerant broccoli. So there's been this discussion of broccoli being something that needs to be worked on. So we got really excited about, okay, let's jump into another big group project. So we scoured, places, our favorite books of beautiful pictures for broccolis, and we talked to our friends, and we contacted the germplasm bank for Canada. Turns out they don't have any broccoli in their system. So then we went to the States to grin. What Heron was talking about makes you smile. At the time, there was no smiling happening because Trump had shut down the government and we could not get access to it, and they couldn't get access to it as either. So we waited until that situation was over, and then worked with a wonderful person at Grin to see what broccoli successions in their system might work for us. Something that she wanted from us was to prove that we were a legit breeding group, or because she was curious that we were not associated with a university or a company. And so Annie and I scoured all of the newspaper articles that had been written about the Pepper Project, or like our posters, and sent them to her and convinced her that she could send us some broccoli. I'm going back for a second. One of the so Heron talked about this, like not all projects go exactly how you want, and so we planted seeds that we got this year, and none of them produced seed. So we continue to move forward on this project and are very grateful to have connected with Heron, who, as you could tell, has connections to further people who have been working with broccoli, and so to share the questions that we have and the expertise has been a real joy. This is a little quote from the book, just mentioning who could be part of plant breeding clubs. I just thought it was very interesting that people who were experts in law and accounting could be part of plant breeding clubs, and that's so a plant breeding club would be formed by dedicated individuals who are concerned about the world food problem, the environment. Most of the members would be either farmers or amateur gardeners who are prepared to undertake the actual work of plant breeding. However, a few members would be professionals with the expertise in fields such as science, farming, law, and accounting. And I just highlight that one section because it brings to mind just how many questions we are running into as a plant breeding club around that are beyond just how do you create crosses, how do you select? And those are questions of like, how do you share the profits and the burdens between each other? How do we eventually release a variety? We have folks who have seed companies themselves. We have folks that don't. And then there's also the question of how do we protect new creations from being adopted by people who may profit themselves without recognizing our work, and also, but at the same time being able to share the work, as seeds are always, in my mind, meant to be shared. So thinking of intellectual property around seeds is such a murky issue. And when it involves policy and law within a country, it gets even more mucky to myself, who would rather be, selecting and planting and doing that kind of work. So we ask those questions. We don't have answers. I encourage us to chat about that. But it just to really, I am very excited about groups of people doing work together, and I things that have been said yesterday and today is that there's so much potential and so much work out there that can be done. A question we also ask is, how do we do things that we are good at but isn't duplicated by, say, another plant breeding club very close by? So how do we say, okay, we're working on broccoli, but maybe you can work on eggplant or whatever it is, and so that we're not trying to do everything at once, which is hard to do when you're very excited. Yeah. So that was a quick, short sort of discussion of SeedWorks, but I am very excited to further the conversation with you. So.
Merci Rebecca. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions pour Rebecca sur comment collaborer, comment est-ce que vous avez fait sur l'aspect technique ou l'aspect plus organisationnel? Olivier, tu avais la main levée?
I don't know if it's in the subject, but I'm wondering, when you breed pepper, do you choose a female or a male? The females sometimes keep more genetics in. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so with the pepper project, since it was our first project, it's the thing that was the catalyst to bring us together. Rachel did the cross, and I'm not actually sure who was the parent, what parent was what. All I know is that it was a cross between those two. Do you know any? No. So for that project, I don't know, and we haven't been working on further peppers, so I haven't had to ask that question.
Bob said yesterday that he thinks that it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions pour Rebecca? J'ai une question à l'arrière. Tu peux...
Oui, bonjour. Moi, je suis Stéphane Gariepi. Je travaille en transfert de connaissances pour Agriculture et Agroalimentaire Canada. Ma question, you referred to Gene Bank Canada.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder at which extent you have seeds and lineages that came from Gene Bank Canada, actually.
That is a great question. So we searched, the listing for the Gene Bank in Saskatoon for vegetables, and broccoli, they had none. Kathy called them, I understand, and they agreed that they didn't have any. So we don't have any.
Okay, but I know that they have many lineages, for example, of Jerusalem artichoke.
Right.
I don't know if there are groups that could be interested in these. About intellectual property, I was also wondering if people here could be interested to organize a training, because within AAFC, Agriculture Canada, there's a whole team that is dedicated to intellectual property protection and commercialization. So maybe it could be possible to get something organized to transfer some of our knowledge in intellectual properties to people who would be interested to know more. Maybe it could be done in collaboration with Hugo's group.
That sounds amazing. As I said, it's something that I think intimidates me a bit, so it's harder for me to learn. But if we have conversations, that's where I learn best. And to know that sometimes I feel a little outside the system, and so to have conversations with folks that I see maybe more within the system is really helpful to breaking down those barriers.
Thank you, Rebecca.